Western celebrity Angelina Jolie made a visit to Kherson to profile the women and children under siege from Russian forces. But in the process, the story got swallowed up by the story of her driver getting drafted into the Ukrainian army. Is this reflective of a real problem, Russian propaganda, or maybe both? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this one. So, Angelina Jolie did a goodwill tour, essentially, a humanitarian visit to Ukraine, helping to draw attention to particularly the Kherson region, a city that is directly on the front line that has been subject to some pretty brutal attacks by Russian forces. But the story got swallowed up because her driver, a Ukrainian citizen and reserve officer, didn't have a valid mobilization deferment, right? And Jolie continued her visit after learning that the man had been detained at a checkpoint to go to a draft center. Now, he was drafted into the Ukrainian military. But what I thought was most interesting about this is that this has been actually part of a pretty controversial discussion in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine, and that is the draft. Now, I want to be clear. The Russian propaganda machine has doubled down on the draft, claiming that Ukraine is forcing men to fight, recruiting them off the street. And, I'm going to be honest, that's pretty much true, right? But what do you think a draft means? I guess this is my argument. Like, what do you think it means to draft, right? It means, conscription means that people don't volunteer to fight. They are legally required to fight. And so Ukraine has reportedly had a pretty sprawling network of people trying to get out of serving, either with fake military or medical waivers, literally just hiding from draft officers, and trying everything they can to try to prevent themselves from being recruited and put into combat. Now, the Russians love these stories because, well, this is in contrast to the Russian military, who relies on volunteers. To be clear, the Russians incur substantially more casualties than the Ukrainians do, but the Russians rely on highly paid volunteer troops to do so. And the Russians love to create, in some cases, actually either amplify real stories of Ukrainians being, for example, grabbed off the street and brought into recruitment centers, but also they love fake, in this case, an AI video depicting a crying Ukrainian soldier who says, "Oh, I've been drafted, I'm going to die." Now, the funny thing is, he says, "I'm only 23, please help me," in the AI video. But Ukraine's own draft law says that no one is being recruited before age 27. And this is generated from AI, and in fact, the base image on it is actually a Russian streamer. You can see here a pretty famous Russian streamer who's being depicted as a sort of Ukrainian. You can see here, literally, there's whole accounts that are just fake Ukrainians who have been drafted, who are crying, some of which literally are screenshots of the vlogger himself, some of which are very clearly AI generated, but some of them do occasionally go viral. Now, the irony, of course, is that even the Russian embassy in Belgium points out that this kid is, not only is he not a Ukrainian, but he's actually a Russian neo-Nazi, pro-Putin Nazi. Literally, it's not, that he would agree with that statement. So, but that doesn't mean that there aren't also like real Ukrainian manpower problems, right? In an Oval Office meeting a few months ago, J.D. Vance accused the Ukrainian president of forcing people to fight on the front lines, which again is what conscription is. He says, right now you guys are going around forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict, Vance told Zelensky. Which again, the U.S. president has failed to bring a close to the conflict. Now, this, I think, is like the problem is that there's a huge mismatch between Ukraine, a relatively small country, and Russia, a very, very large one. And when they try to discern the casualties, Russian casualties truly are phenomenal, right? By about the middle of this year, Russia had probably about 200,000 KIA in this war, and probably about another 80,000 missing, right? So you're looking around 250, maybe 300K Russians KIA, with another probably, they estimate, about for every one KIA, about 2 are severely wounded, so severely wounded they're discharged from medical service. So that is probably closer to, again, you're looking at probably about a little less than a million, maybe 600,000 to 800,000 Russians who are either KIA or too wounded to ever fight again. Now, discerning that number for Ukraine, which is almost certainly lower, is actually pretty tough. Though Ukraine reportedly, again, has far more deserters, in part because Ukraine, again, is conscripting people versus Russia that is just recruiting highly paid volunteers. But Ukrainians claim they're recruiting up to 30,000 people each month, but that's seems high because that's close to the Russian number. And there's a deeper issue here, right? There's the Russian love of claiming that Ukraine has such severe manpower problems that they are literally like having people like sobbing as they go to the front. But there is a real like manpower issue that Ukraine has been facing for a long time. There's also reportedly a Soviet style of fighting that closely resembles the Russian style. And the problem is that it lacks flexibility and is willing to expend men at this almost as though they are equipment themselves. So you combine those two and you end up with a real problem that is also seized on by Russian propagandists. And the compounding issue is that the more people dodge the draft, the more people avoid service, the more dangerous service becomes, right? If Ukraine could get, for example, the 100,000 men who have likely fled the country since turning 27, if they could get those into the armed forces, you would have a more stable front line. You would have a lower casualty rate. You would have rotations. You could even implement service draft periods where they say, listen, you're being drafted, but your period of service is only 18 months, right? You could have all of those things. Again, there's an estimated 600,000 to 800,000 men living outside of Ukraine. And that is its own issue because, again, that represents almost an entire rotation of Ukrainian armed forces. So this is a fundamental like conundrum where the manpower crisis is fueling the manpower crisis in Ukraine. And the fact that someone like Angelina Jolie, a major Western celebrity, was still unable to protect their driver is, again, a reflection of both the fact that Ukraine is serious about this and the fact that, you know, being a Western celebrity, you don't get the Trump Ukrainian law, but it also, I think, reflects, again, a inflexibility that Ukraine has to now operate with. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much. Thanks to GMAT Club, Henry Ruscio, James Porsche, Paul, and Peter Fucci, as well as all of our Lieutenant Tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. Thanks. See ya. Cheers.